Gardening, to me, is very much like social change in the sense that you don't know what the outcome is going to be. Is it a sunny year? Is it a wet, cold year? You don't know. You just go into it at the beginning saying, I'm going to work at it despite the obstacles, and I'm going to accept the final outcome of what comes out from the end. Some years, some vegetables are very bountiful, and then the next year you'll get nothing from it.
Sometimes deep changes can happen overnight. Like all of a sudden you can't smoke inside buildings anymore, and it just happens. And other ones, like some of the things that people would have believed in the 70s, they're all amazingly ludicrous now.
It's going to take time because what's involved is a change of consciousness and people's thinking.
When you're pushing and pushing and pushing, and you've been an activist, for a very short period of time, you want to see that change right away. But you don't realize it's a marathon. It's not just a race, it's a marathon.
It's just about that passion to show up for whether it's the land or people that don't always have the strength or the voice to be able to speak up for themselves.
Activism would encompass any effort towards progressive social change that would bring about social equity, environmental justice.
To me, it just means something as simple as phoning a member of government or joining a volunteer board.
You can be active by attending a rally that someone else has organized. You can be active by donating money to different causes. And though there's another level of activism where one is actually organizing the campaigns that you're hoping other people will support.
I would describe it as when citizens mobilize to showcase their need for change or to enact that change directly for them and their communities.
It's really drawing attention to the injustices and the things that are bringing everyone down as a society, and what we can do to fix those things, to make those changes.
I remember being really aware that things were not always fair and balanced for not only for Indigenous, but just for people of color. And I think growing up in Calgary, back when I was a kid, it was a very white city. So I just felt very precious about my culture and about representing that in a way that I didn't feel like I was being absorbed by the white culture that was all around me all the time. When I was teenager, late teens, I did attend the Lubicon Lake protests that happened up in Lubicon, sitting on the road for days and, trying to stop the progression of what the band council was trying to stop it, and I was supporting them.
For many people here in Calgary, I think they became more aware of the struggle when the Winter Olympics came to Calgary. And you had the Glenbow Museum creating this Spirit Sings project where they brought in artifacts from all over the country and around the world. That was sponsored by many of the very oil companies who were up in northern Alberta, disrupting, the traditional way of life of the Lubicon Nation, where people supported themselves, through hunting, trapping, gathering.
The way change has sort of happened for us as Indigenous people has been a huge amount of lobbying, a huge amount of, being invited into these circles and having non-Indigenous people be, just listen and not have to, speak into everything, just actually listening.
And then when the NDP was elected in 2015, that land claim was finally settled.
There's so many things that are happening now where we are in control of how that narrative is. And to me, that's a huge payoff, and it can only get better.
So when we see events like the Marches for Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women, we are seeing more and more and more communities being welcomed in and starting to understand and starting to develop a sense of ownership of, like, it's our job to come together as society and to change these things.
One of my first activist as an artist activity involved what was called the Ross Kerr block. It burnt down and eventually it was knocked down. But they put up hoarding, horrible gray fences all around it. They were super gray, they were super ugly. I looked at the thing every day, I walked past it every day. And they spray painted on each panel, they were about 10 feet wide, no posters. Just, with a stencil, no posters. One night, I made my own stencil, and I just added underneath no posters, I just wrote after 5 p.m. And then the fence just took on a life. And then I thought, okay, I gotta own up to this. I wanna animate that. I wanna activate that. I reached out to the developer and said, let me have that fence. Let me organize a community painting day. And I want you to pay for it. I want you to pay the artists. And they agreed. There was 50 panels around the fence. And it was a full-on community day of painting. And that hoarding stayed up until they finally started building. You never see a boring gray fence anymore. So I think we did that.
I had been involved with a group from the Amazon called the Achuar in 2012. We did a national tour. We made friends with some people that had guided us through Fort McMurray, and it was an impactful campaign for that group. They were trying to stop Talisman Energy from developing some oil resources in the Peruvian part of the Amazon. So the group was also involved across the border in Ecuador. At that point, Ecuador was starting to auction off new rounds of petroleum exploration. And so they reached out to people in Calgary that they already had relationships with and asked us if we could support them in interrupting the auction meetings that were being held. I called up Michelle and said, we're doing this. What do you think about it?
I was like, yeah, let's do this. And they got me business cards, Arusha made, that said I was a legal analyst.
We just took names of a bunch of different oil companies and laser printed ourselves some business cards and signed up for the meeting.
And then I went to Value Village and I bought this outfit that made me look like I was a legal analyst, and even a briefcase, which I thought was so cute.
And so we basically came up with a pretty simple plan, which was that we would pretend to be legitimate oil interests and that we would go to this meeting. And when it got to a good point, we would interrupt the meeting, have a banner, and make a statement. So I'm looking around for more people. So I came from where I was, came into the Arusha Centre, and there was a couple of people sitting here, Gerald and Mike. I said, you want to come? And they said, sure.
That morning, I met these two other men that they also spoke to, and I didn't know these guys before, and so I was like, okay. I met them in a cafe that was right under the convention center, and it was just like this clandestine thing, and we walked in, and we were like, is that you? Is that you? Okay. We went and sat in the corner, and we're like, okay, we're gonna do this. It's 8 a.m. The meeting starts at 8:30. We're gonna go upstairs, and we're gonna separately walk in. And we did. And we went upstairs. Arusha paid for my registration fee to get in. And we walked in and we just sort of pretended that we were a part of the crowd. And we listened and listened and listened as these petroleum companies basically were selling off like a huge amount of the rainforest. And then they showed this video of the Indigenous peoples down in the rainforest. And that was exactly who Arusha had been in contact with. And I was just devastated watching this because I knew it wasn't the truth. I sent the text to the other two guys that were planted in the audience, and I just stood up.
Hi, I'd just like to say my name is Michelle Thrush. My real name is Goodfeathers Woman. And I would just like to ask why you are auctioning off over 3 million hectares of Indigenous land without the consent of the people down there. We actually have a declaration of opposition coming from the Indigenous communities whose lives and livelihoods will be devastated with this block Here's a map also to show you the Indigenous nationalities whose fierce resistance forced you to cancel your last oil round. And I would like to say that the Indigenous communities, the video that you just watched is not the truth. We have direct communication with these communities, and they are very, very concerned about not being consulted, and they are not at all participating in this. They have been there for thousands and thousands of years, living close to the land, and if this goes through, we will have a definite problem with the environment. So please listen to us from the Amazon people down there, the 7 different nationalities that are involved in this oil round.
They were just stunned. They were stunned. And then I just looked at the organizers who were just standing there staring at me. And I said, would you like security to escort us out now? And they were like, this big guy came and just walked us out. But the next day, I think, or maybe it was even that day, it was announced that the oil investors pulled out.
We're talking, you know, 500 million, 1 billion barrels of oil that didn't get produced, and like nations that are still living a reasonably independent and traditional life on their own terms. Those are like huge successes.
It's not for sale, the Amazon. It's not for sale, the Amazon. We can't eat oil. We can't eat oil. We can't eat oil. We can't eat oil.
Well, welcome to the Hillhurst Sunnyside Community Garden. It was an abandoned lot. There was oil drums, there was an old car at one point, you know, going from an empty lot with garbage to a community garden. It took a lot of negotiating with the city.
The struggles that we had was that this was a new thing and there was no precedence for it with the city and with their different departments, because you had to work with so many different departments. Whose department owned the land you wanted to use? The department to bring the water in, the power in, to put a fence in, to do all of that stuff was just a struggle. Now, the city will just help you put a garden in. That would be unheard of 40 years ago. Unheard of.
5 or so years ago, the city of Calgary approached the community association, approached us to say, we have 200 fruit trees and we want to give them to you to look after. So it's come full circle to me to that's what I think of when I think of change. And it's just another example of shifting the dial a little bit. So the city starts to think, the city employees start to think, let's reach out to that radical Hillhurst Sunnysiders and offer them 200 fruit trees and see what they say.
The biggest barriers to doing new things is like comfort and familiarity. It's easier to oppose change than it is to make change.
Navigating resistance is, I just try to do it with humor. You know, like, again, no posters after 5 p.m. Like, too funny, right? Simple, funny, and it created a whole movement.
Sometimes it just takes a small seed to grow a huge tree. And when we see these really beautiful ideas and how all they need is a little bit of a push, a little bit of support, and a little bit of nurturing, and a little bit of money to help them grow. A Take Action grant is a grant offered to people who are making social change, who are doing work within activism or social justice or environmental initiatives. It is up to $2,000, half in federal dollars, and then the other half is Calgary dollars. Calgary dollars is a local currency that allows local businesses to basically trade together. So I buy my groceries with it through Fresh Roots. I have an addiction to board games, so I buy all my board games for 50% off from Century Box. A lot of people don't know that. But even I take honoraria in Calgary dollars. When I do my workshops, I take a percentage in Calgary dollars. It's really a way to make sure that the money stays here. It stays in Calgary. It can help, fund our families and our communities and our friends and those initiatives that are actually going to make the city grow in a good way.
Activism is messy. It doesn't always work out as you want. You don't get quick results. We certainly haven't in the past few years here. But I think from every, try you put at it, every event, every, connection, that there's something, one more step is made. So even if the progress wasn't here in Calgary today, there's progress happening somewhere, and us supporting that is contributing to progress. I'm part of the group of youth who started the climate strikes here in Calgary, like Fridays for Future, after being inspired by climate strikes happening notably by Greta Thunberg, but progressively by youth around the world. The climate strike, for the most part, was held right here at City Hall, right behind where we're standing. There was large crowds of people, as you can imagine, with 1,000 people packed into here. We had a stage up right in front of the doors of City Hall. There were speeches, there was music. It was quite an inspirational environment to know that there was other people pushing for change, but it was also sort of nerve-wracking in a way, because you realized the gravity that everyone kind of had that same sense of panic that you did, but it really showed that there was tons of citizens, especially in Calgary, who wanted change.
Too much carbon in the atmosphere. Grow on and climate action.
Guess who wins? Because treaty trumps any of the false laws that are written.
If we said in 2018 that the idea globally will need to be net zero by 2040, everyone would have been like, that's extreme, that's crazy, no one can do it. Nowadays, even the city of Calgary has declared a climate emergency, saying there'll be net zero by 2050, and I'm definitely excited about that. But when a city in the heart of the oil and gas industry is ready to go net zero by 2050, I think that's strong progress.
When I first came to town, I used to ride my bike and I'd hardly ever meet another person commuting to work. Now, at some point, like coming here today on my bike, it was, you're slowing down a lot. There's so many people out there, so it's great.
The situation for women has changed dramatically. I wouldn't want to live back then, because once I married, I could no longer be a teacher. Something as simple as that just kind of puts it on the table.
It's funny, a few months ago, I got an inbox on Twitter from a girl that I did go to school with years ago, a non-Native girl. And she wrote me on my Twitter and she's like, Michelle, I just watched you on Blackstone and I just had to write you and say, I'm so sorry for all that stuff I put you through when you were young about teasing you about being Native and all the kids that were mean to you, Michelle. And I was just like, what? That was like gold.
I'm not a solitary person. The things I've done, I've cultivated, I've grown, I've made friends and grown fruits from those friends that help to nurture my activist soul.
Hopelessness is the enemy of justice. And when we have hope, that allows us to stand up and to speak up when we're being told to shut up and go away. It's a privilege to be able to work on these issues. So for me, it's almost a responsibility. The privilege comes with responsibility to challenge power relationships and oppression.
When a big enough number of people decide they want change and decide they're going to act on it, I think anything could happen with that.
I like to think of a spiral, because it's like shit we used to do in the 80s. We're maybe still doing them, but maybe we're doing them better and better.
I feel like now we're in a time where we're harvesting some of that investment. And there are, like I said, there's so many things that are happening now where we are in control of how that narrative is.
I just look at every day as a joy. I want to make the most of every day, and I don't want to be part of the problems. I want to be part of solutions. And so that's how I find my energy and my will to keep going.
The things that I find that nurture my activist soul and nurture my energy is talking about the past and realizing, oh my goodness, I contributed to this. That I'm super proud of that.
And sometimes if you're looking at it like week to week, you get overwhelmed. But if you're looking at it year to year, you start to see those changes.
What matters is what's ahead of you and how you can keep growing and expanding and making places for everyone to be together so you can always have more reinforcements. So that on the other side of the tipping point, there's a new space and everyone has something to do together and you're in it together. That's what matters.